You'll just slow us down. 5 words that shattered 40 years of sacrifice in a single breath. My daughter Ashley stood 3 feet away from me at Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3, looking everywhere except into my eyes. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep finding the courage to tell these stories. My name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm 74 years old. That morning, I had woken up at 4 a.m. in my small apartment on the South Side, my hands trembling with excitement as I pressed the lavender dress I'd bought specifically for our family trip to Paris. The fabric was soft cotton, nothing fancy, but it made me feel elegant. I had saved for 6 months to afford it, setting aside $20 here and there from my Social Security check. I clutched my worn leather purse against my chest, the same one my late husband Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. Inside, my passport sat in a plastic sleeve, protected like a precious artifact. I had arrived at the airport 3 hours early, sitting on those uncomfortable blue chairs near Gate B7, watching every face that passed through the sliding glass doors. When Ashley finally appeared, my heart should have soared. Instead, it began to crack. She walked toward me with the purposeful stride of someone completing an unpleasant task. No rolling suitcase, no excited grandchildren trailing behind her, no husband juggling carry-on bags. Just Ashley, in her expensive navy business suit, holding nothing but a small designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Mom," she said, not sitting down, not embracing me. Her voice was flat, rehearsed. "We've been talking as a family, and we think maybe it's better if you don't come on this trip." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. The airport noise, announcements, rolling luggage, children laughing, suddenly became muffled, as if I were underwater. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the terminal's chaos. "I'm packed. I'm ready. We planned this together." Ashley's eyes darted to her phone, then to the departure board, anywhere but my face. "You'll just slow us down, Mom. All that walking in Paris, the stairs, the jet lag, you'd hate it. Plus, the kids are so excited they'll be running around constantly. It wouldn't be relaxing for any of us." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sealed white envelope, extending it toward me like she was handing over a parking ticket. "There's a gift card for the Marriott downtown and a voucher for Lou Mitchell's diner. Spend a few nice days in the city. Treat yourself. We'll bring you back a souvenir from the Eiffel Tower." My fingers felt numb as I took the envelope. The paper was crisp, expensive. Everything about this moment had been planned, calculated, executed with the efficiency Ashley brought to her corporate job. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at her face. The face I had kissed goodnight for 18 years. The face I had watched graduate valedictorian from Northwestern. The face I had held when she cried about her divorce. "Yesterday you said you couldn't wait for our grandmother-granddaughter time. You said Sarah and Emma were so excited to show me the Louvre." For just a moment, Ashley's composed mask slipped. I saw something flicker across her features. Guilt, maybe? Or irritation at my resistance to her neat solution. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The girls will be fine. They're teenagers now. They don't really need—" She stopped herself, but I heard the unfinished sentence hanging in the air like smoke. "They don't need you." I tried to stand, but my legs had turned to water. The blue airport chair suddenly felt like the only solid thing in a world that had just revealed itself to be built on quicksand. Around us, families rushed past with their matching luggage sets and excited chatter about upcoming adventures. A little girl no older than 5 was telling her grandmother about all the gelato they were going to eat in Rome. "Ashley," I said, my voice cracking, "I've been planning this for months. I bought new clothes. I researched the museums. I learned some French phrases. I told Mrs. Chen next door to water my plants because we'd be gone for 2 weeks. And you can still use those phrases at the diner," Ashley replied, checking her watch. "Mom, I really need to go. Security lines are probably terrible, and you know how Marcus gets when we're running late." Marcus, her second husband, who had never hidden his opinion that I was an inconvenience to their carefully curated suburban lifestyle. At family dinners, he would check his phone while I spoke, or excuse himself to take important calls whenever I shared a story about my day. Ashley leaned down and gave me a quick, hollow kiss on the forehead, the kind you give to a distant relative at a funeral. Love you, Mom. Enjoy your little staycation. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished terminal floor with the same rhythm as a ticking clock. I watched her disappear into the crowd of travelers, her navy suit blending into the sea of business people and vacationing families. I sat there for 3 hours after their flight had departed, holding that envelope in my lap, watching planes taxi outside the enormous windows. The gift card inside was for 2 nights at a mid-tier hotel. The diner voucher was for $30. 40 years of raising her alone after Robert's death, working double shifts at the hospital, selling our house to pay her college tuition, missing my own life so she could build hers. And this was my value, $74 and 2 nights in a corporate hotel. When I finally stood to leave, my reflection in the terminal window looked like a stranger, a small, gray-haired woman in a lavender dress that suddenly seemed too young, too hopeful for her circumstances. The face staring back at me looked lost, abandoned, forgotten. As I rode the Blue Line train back into the city, watching Chicago's skyline blur past, I realized that somewhere along the way, I had become invisible to my own daughter, not a person with feelings and dreams and decades of stories to tell, but an obligation to be managed, a problem to be solved with gift cards and kind lies. The train car was nearly empty, except for a young woman about Ashley's age, talking animatedly on the phone. "Mom, you're going to love Prague," she was saying, laughing. "I already booked us a spa day. We're going to be so spoiled." I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cool window, feeling something inside my chest crack open like an egg. But unlike an egg, what spilled out wasn't nourishment. It was 40 years of swallowed disappointments, unspoken resentments, and the terrible realization that love is not always reciprocated, even when it's given without reservation. That night, sitting alone in the sterile hotel room Ashley had paid for, I found myself staring at a shoebox I'd brought along, the one containing 40 years of memories I'd planned to share with my granddaughters in Paris. Photos, letters, ticket stubs from places Robert and I had dreamed of visiting together someday. The first photograph I pulled out was from Ashley's high school graduation. She's beaming in her cap and gown, holding a bouquet of roses. What the picture doesn't show is that I had worked 3 consecutive double shifts at Chicago General Hospital to afford those roses, or that I had sewn the dress I'm wearing in the photo because I couldn't afford to buy one. I remember that day so clearly. Ashley had hugged me tight and whispered, "Mom, someday I'm going to take you everywhere. We'll travel the world together, I promise." The next photo was from her wedding to David, her first husband. I'm standing beside her in a pale blue dress, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. What Ashley never knew was that I had cashed in my entire retirement fund to pay for that wedding. $28,000. Every penny I had saved for my golden years, because she had dreamed of a ceremony at the Palmer House Hotel since she was 12. "I'll pay you back, Mom," she had said, tears streaming down her face as she signed the vendor contracts. "Once David's practice takes off, we'll pay you back everything." David's practice did take off. They bought a house in Winnetka with a 3-car garage and a pool, but the payback never came. Instead, Ashley would say things like, "Mom, you know money doesn't matter to you the way it matters to us. You're so much happier with simple things." I flipped through more photos. Ashley's college graduation from Northwestern, where I'm standing in the back row because the front was reserved for major donors. I had worked as a night janitor at the university for 4 years to get the employee tuition discount that made her education possible. My hands were permanently stained from industrial cleaning chemicals, but Ashley graduated debt-free. There's a photo from Emma's birth 8 years ago. Ashley's holding my first granddaughter, and I'm standing beside the hospital bed with tears in my eyes. What you can't see is that I had just worked a 16-hour shift in the ER, then driven straight to the maternity ward, because Ashley had called, crying, saying she needed me. "Mom, I don't know how to do this," she had sobbed. "What if I'm a terrible mother?" I had held her hand and said, "You're going to be amazing, and I'll always be here to help." For the first 2 years of Emma's life, I was there almost every day. Diaper changes at 3 a.m. when Ashley was exhausted, rocking Emma through colic while Ashley slept, babysitting every weekend so Ashley and David could have couple time. I had given up my own social life, my book club, my volunteer work at the animal shelter. Everything revolved around being available for Ashley's family. Then came the divorce. Ashley moved back into my small 2-bedroom apartment with 18-month-old Emma and newborn Sarah. For 3 years, I shared my space, my food, my utilities, my life. I would come home from 12-hour hospital shifts to find Ashley stressed and overwhelmed, the apartment in chaos, both girls crying. "I don't know how you did it alone, Mom," she would say, bouncing Sarah while Emma tugged at her pants. "I'm falling apart, and I have you helping me. How did you manage when Dad died and I was only 8? I had managed by working 3 jobs and never sleeping more than 4 hours a night. I had managed by eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so Ashley could have proper meals. I had managed by wearing the same coat for 7 winters so she could have new school clothes each year. But I never told her any of that. Instead, I would take the girls to my bedroom and let Ashley shower in peace, or nap on the couch, or talk on the phone with her friends about how hard her life had become. The photo that made my hand shake was from Ashley's second wedding to Marcus 3 years ago. It's a beautiful ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley. I'm sitting in the second row, not the first, because Marcus's parents had flown in from Boston and were given the seats of honor. What Ashley doesn't know is that I had sold my mother's engagement ring, the only valuable thing I owned, to pay for my plane ticket and hotel for that wedding. The ring had been in our family for 3 generations, but I couldn't afford the trip otherwise, and I couldn't miss my daughter's wedding. During the reception, I overheard Marcus talking to his business partner. "Ashley's mother is sweet," he said, "but she's a bit clingy, always wanting to be involved in everything. We're hoping she'll find her own activities now that Ashley's settling down again." Clingy. The word had burned in my chest like acid. I remembered last Christmas, when I had spent my entire Social Security check on gifts for Emma and Sarah, American Girl dolls they had specifically requested. Ashley opened the packages and smiled politely, then whispered to Marcus, "She shouldn't have spent so much. We could have gotten these ourselves." But the girls had wanted them from Grandma specifically. Emma had called me 3 times to make sure I remembered that the doll had to have red hair, just like mine. Sarah had drawn me a picture of what outfit she wanted her doll to wear. Marcus had shrugged and said, "Maybe next year we should just give your mom a budget. Keep things reasonable. A budget. For loving my granddaughters." I pulled out a letter Ashley had written me from college, one of the few she had ever sent. In her careful handwriting, she had written, "Mom, I know I don't say it enough, but you're my hero. You sacrificed everything for me, and someday I'm going to make it all worth it. I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me. I promise." That letter was dated 22 years ago. Last month, when I had mentioned that my arthritis was making it difficult to manage the stairs to my 3rd-floor apartment, Ashley had said, "Mom, you should look into those senior living places. They have activities and everything. You'd probably make friends." When I suggested maybe moving closer to her family, she had laughed, not meanly, but dismissively. "Mom, Winnetka is so expensive, plus you'd be bored out there. You're a city person." What she meant was, "You don't fit in my world." I thought about all the times I had canceled plans to babysit when Ashley needed a date night. All the times I had worked extra shifts to help with Emma's private school tuition or Sarah's dance classes. All the times I had said, "Of course, honey," when Ashley called needing something, even when I was exhausted or sick or had my own problems to handle. When my friend Margaret died last year, Ashley had said she was too busy to come to the funeral. "You understand, Mom. Emma has a soccer tournament, and Marcus has that client dinner." I had sat alone in the front pew at St. Mary's, the only mourner for a woman who had been my closest friend for 30 years. After the service, the priest had asked if Margaret had any family, and I had to explain that yes, she had a daughter. But the daughter was busy. The pattern was always the same. When Ashley needed something, money, babysitting, emotional support, someone to blame for her stress, I was indispensable. When she didn't need something, I was invisible. I remembered her 35th birthday party last year. I had arrived with a homemade cake, German chocolate, her favorite since childhood. I had spent 2 days making it perfect, hand-grinding the coconut, making the frosting from scratch the way my mother had taught me. Ashley had thanked me politely, then set it aside in favor of the professional cake Marcus had ordered from a trendy bakery. At the end of the night, I saw my cake in the garbage, untouched. "Oh, Mom, we had so much dessert," Ashley had said when she noticed me looking. "But it was sweet of you to make it." Sweet. Like I was a well-meaning neighbor instead of the woman who had spent 40 years putting her needs before my own. Now, sitting in this impersonal hotel room, holding these photographs that documented decades of one-sided love, I felt something inside me begin to shift. Not break. It had been breaking for years, piece by piece, disappointment by disappointment. This was different. This was the moment when I finally understood what I had been too afraid to admit. I had spent 40 years buying love that was never actually for sale. Tomorrow, I would go home to my small apartment and figure out how to fill the days that had been meant for Paris. But tonight, for the first time in decades, I would cry not just for what I had lost, but for what I had never really had. Was I used? The question echoed in my mind as I turned off the hotel room lights. The answer was floating there in the darkness, waiting for me to be brave enough to acknowledge it. Yes, I was used. And somehow I had taught them that it was okay. The next morning, I returned to my apartment on South Ashland Avenue, but something felt different. The familiar creak of the wooden stairs, the smell of Mrs. Chen's cooking drifting from 2B, the way sunlight filtered through my kitchen curtains. Everything looked the same, but I was seeing it through different eyes. I made coffee in the same blue mug I'd used for 15 years, but my hands were shaking. Not from age or caffeine withdrawal, but from the weight of realizations that had been building like sediment in my chest, layer by layer, year after year. I sat at my small kitchen table and did something I'd never done before. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. For 40 years, I had trusted Ashley to help me manage my finances because she was good with numbers, and I was too emotional about money. She had access to my accounts for emergencies, she said, to help me budget better. The screen loaded slowly, and when it did, my coffee mug slipped from my fingers. Gone. The entire emergency fund I'd been building for the last 8 years. $12,000 set aside from my Social Security checks. $20 here, $50 there. Completely emptied. The last withdrawal was dated 3 weeks ago. The memo read, "Family emergency. Ashley Morrison Wells." My chest felt tight. I scrolled through the transaction history with trembling fingers. June, $2,000 withdrawal. Emma's summer camp. May, $1,500. Sarah's dental work. April, $800. Car repair. March, $3,200. House renovation emergency. Emergency. Everything was always an emergency with Ashley, but somehow her emergencies never prevented the family from planning expensive vacations or buying new cars. I called the bank, my voice barely steady. "This is Evelyn Harper. I need to check on some withdrawals from my savings account." "Of course, Mrs. Harper. I see several withdrawals over the past 6 months by your authorized account manager, Ashley Morrison Wells. Is there a problem?" Authorized account manager. When had that happened? When had I become so diminished that my own daughter needed to manage my money like I was a child? I wasn't aware of all these withdrawals, I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Harper, according to our records, Ms. Morrison Wells has power of attorney over your financial accounts. This was set up in January of this year. Do you not remember signing these documents?" January. I remembered January. I had been recovering from pneumonia, weak and confused from medication. Ashley had visited with a stack of papers, saying they were, "Just updating your insurance information, Mom. Sign here and here. Don't worry about reading all the legal stuff." I had signed them, trusting, grateful that someone was taking care of the complicated things. "I need to revoke that power of attorney," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Certainly, Mrs. Harper. You'll need to come in person with proper identification. We can schedule an appointment for you." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, staring at the empty bank statement. This wasn't just about money. This was about being erased, one signature at a time, until I had no agency left in my own life. I thought about last month's emergency. The $3,200 for house renovation. Ashley had called me crying, saying their bathroom ceiling had collapsed and they needed immediate help. Mom, the contractors want cash up front and our credit cards are maxed out from Emma's orthodontist. We'll pay you back as soon as the insurance check comes in. The next week, I had seen photos on Ashley's Facebook of their brand new kitchen renovation. Not the bathroom, the kitchen. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, custom cabinets. The kind of renovation that costs $30,000, not $3,000. I scrolled through more of her social media posts. Emma at an expensive sleepaway camp in Wisconsin, the one that cost $4,000 for 6 weeks. Sarah in professional dance costumes that cost hundreds of dollars each. Marcus at his golf club, posting pictures of his new driver that cost more than my monthly rent. And there I was, completely absent from their digital life. 40 years of being the most important person in Ashley's world, and I had been edited out of her story completely. The last photo that included me was from Christmas, and it was telling. Ashley's family is arranged perfectly around their massive tree. Ashley in a designer dress, Marcus in a cashmere sweater, the girls in matching velvet dresses that probably cost more than my winter coat. I'm standing at the edge of the frame, half cropped out, wearing the same navy dress I'd worn to church for 5 years. The caption read, "Blessed to spend Christmas with family. So grateful for everything we have. Chatter grateful, chatter family, chatter blessed." But I wasn't really family in that photo. I was background, like a piece of furniture that happened to be in the shot. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter. "Hi, Grandma," she said, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "Mom said you couldn't come to Paris because you were sick?" My heart clenched. They had lied to the girls. Of course they had. "I'm not sick, sweetheart," I said carefully. There was a change of plans. "Oh," long pause. "Well, I wanted to ask you something. I know you're probably busy, but there's this dress I really want for homecoming, and Mom says it's too expensive, but I thought maybe—" The request hung in the air between us. Even my granddaughter had learned to see me as an ATM, not a person with stories to tell or wisdom to share, but a source of funding for things her parents deemed too expensive. "How much is the dress, Emma?" I asked, though I already knew my savings account couldn't afford it. "It's only $400. I know that sounds like a lot, but it's really important to me, and Mom says you like to help with special things." $400. More than my monthly grocery budget. For a dress she'd wear once. "Emma, can I ask you something? When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for something, but just to see how I was doing." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Well, I mean, I've been really busy with school and— "Grandma, you're not mad about the dress, are you? Mom said you always love helping us." I wasn't mad. I was heartbroken. Even my precious granddaughters had been taught that my value lay in what I could provide, not who I was. That evening, I walked to the corner market to buy groceries. I had exactly $43 left until my next Social Security check, which meant careful choices and small portions. At the checkout counter, I heard a familiar laugh. Ashley was 2 lanes over with a cart full of expensive organic groceries, craft beer, imported cheese. She was talking animatedly on her phone, laughing about something. I watched her for a moment. This woman I had given my entire life to, shopping without a care in the world while I counted pennies for bread and milk. She looked happy, carefree, unburdened by any concern for the elderly woman who had raised her. She didn't see me. I stood 15 feet away from my only child, and I was completely invisible to her. I went home and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the phone book, looking up the number for an attorney. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I was finally understanding that I needed to protect myself. No one else was going to do it. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a long, hot bath and thought about Robert. My husband had been dead for 33 years, but I found myself missing him with a fresh intensity that surprised me. "Bobby," I whispered to the empty bathroom, "I think I lost myself somewhere along the way. I think I forgot I was a person separate from being Ashley's mother. If Robert were alive, Would this have happened? Would he have let me disappear into my daughter's needs until I had no needs of my own? I thought about the woman I used to be before I became a mother, before I became a widow, before I became a walking checkbook for other people's dreams. I had wanted to be a teacher once. I had loved reading poetry. I had dreamed of seeing the northern lights, of learning to paint watercolors, of growing a garden full of vegetables. When had I stopped wanting things for myself? When had I decided that wanting was selfish? I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked, not just the quick glances while brushing my teeth or fixing my hair. My face was thinner than I remembered, and my eyes looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. This was the face of a woman who had been slowly disappearing, erasing herself bit by bit to make room for other people's happiness. But I was still here, diminished, hurt, financially devastated, but still here. And for the first time in 40 years, I was going to put myself first. The question wasn't whether I had been used anymore. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Tomorrow, I would call that attorney. Tomorrow, I would start the process of taking back control of my own life. Tonight, I would grieve for the woman I used to be and begin to imagine who I might become. The attorney's office smelled like leather and old wood, the kind of place where serious decisions were made by serious people. Margaret Kowalski was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen enough family disputes to recognize the look of someone who'd finally reached their breaking point. "Mrs. Harper," she said, reviewing the power of attorney documents I'd brought. "This is fairly comprehensive. Your daughter has had complete control over your finances for 6 months. The good news is that revoking it is straightforward. The challenging news is that the money she's already taken, that's going to be much harder to recover." I signed the revocation papers with a steady hand, feeling something shift inside my chest. For the first time in months, I was making a decision about my own life. "I also want to change my will," I said. "Everything currently goes to my daughter. I'd like to explore other options." Margaret nodded without judgment. "Take some time to think about what matters to you, Mrs. Harper. We can schedule another appointment in a few weeks." Walking out of that office, I felt lighter, but also terrified. I had just taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but I knew Ashley wouldn't accept this quietly. I didn't have to wait long. That evening, my phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Ashley's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Mom?" Ashley's voice was sharp, panicked. "What did you do?" "The bank called me and said my access to your account has been revoked. There has to be some mistake." I took a deep breath. "It's not a mistake, Ashley. I revoked your power of attorney." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear Marcus's television in the background, the distant sound of a baseball game. "Mom, that's crazy. You can't manage your own finances. Remember when you overdrafted your account because you forgot about the automatic insurance payment? I'm helping you. I'm protecting you from making mistakes. Mistakes like planning a family vacation and then leaving me at the airport?" Another pause. When Ashley spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she used when one of the girls was being unreasonable. "Mom, we explained that. You would have been miserable. All that walking, the language barrier, the different food. We were thinking of you. By lying to my granddaughters and telling them I was sick, we didn't want them to be disappointed. They'll understand when they're older." I sat down in my kitchen chair, looking at the spot where Robert used to sit when we discussed important decisions together. "Ashley, where did the $12,000 go?" "What $12,000? The lie came so easily, so automatically, that I wondered how many other lies I'd been told over the years. "My emergency fund. The money I've been saving for 8 years. You withdrew all of it." "Mom, those weren't withdrawals. Those were loans. Family emergencies. I've been keeping track of everything, and we'll pay you back when what, Ashley? When Marcus gets his next bonus? When the girls graduate college? When I'm dead?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. I had never spoken to Ashley this directly, never questioned her promises or demanded accountability. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We're family. Family helps each other. You raised me to believe that family comes first. I raised you to believe that love is reciprocal, that relationships require mutual respect and consideration. When did you last do something for me that didn't benefit you? The question seemed to catch her off guard. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her mind racing through potential answers. I call you every week. I include you in family events. You call me when you need something. The last time you visited without asking for money or babysitting was, I honestly can't remember when that was. Mom, that's not fair. I'm busy. I have a career, 2 children, a husband. I can't drop everything to... I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to see me as a person instead of a resource. Ashley's voice sharpened, taking on the edge it got when she was cornered. Fine. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should figure out your own finances. Maybe you should find other people to help you when you need groceries or can't reach something on a high shelf. Maybe you should find someone else to drive you to doctor's appointments. The threat was clear. Stop making demands or lose access to your family entirely. But instead of the fear Ashley expected, I felt something else. Relief. The manipulation was finally out in the open, no longer disguised as love or concern. Maybe I should, I said quietly. The line went dead. 2 days later, Marcus called. His voice was different from Ashley's. Smoother, more calculated, like he was negotiating a business deal. Evelyn, hey, it's Marcus. Ashley's pretty upset about this whole bank thing. Look, I think there's been some miscommunication here. We never meant to take advantage of your generosity. How about we sit down and work something out? Maybe we can set up a payment plan to get you back some of that money. I almost laughed. A payment plan. Like I was a creditor instead of the grandmother who had helped pay for their children's education and extracurricular activities. What kind of payment plan, Marcus? Well, we could probably do a couple $100 a month, maybe more during bonus season. And of course, we'd still be here for you when you need help with things. Ashley's worried that you're isolating yourself. $200 a month would take 5 years to repay $12,000, and that was assuming they actually made the payments. Meanwhile, they'd continue to expect me to be available for babysitting, emotional support, and whatever other needs arose. What if I said no to the payment plan? Marcus's voice cooled noticeably. Well, that would be unfortunate for everyone. The girls would be devastated to lose their relationship with their grandmother over money. Ashley's already heartbroken that you don't trust her anymore. The threat was more sophisticated than Ashley's, but equally clear. Submit to their terms, or be painted as the villain who chose money over family. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course. But Evelyn? Don't take too long. Family relationships are fragile things. Once they're broken, they're hard to repair. That weekend, Emma called. Her voice was small, hurt. Grandma? Mom says you're mad at us about money. She says you might not want to see us anymore. My heart broke a little more. They were using my granddaughters as weapons now, turning them into casualties of a war I had never wanted to fight. Emma, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you. I'm not mad at anyone. I'm just trying to figure some things out. But you'll still come to my birthday party next month, right? I already told everyone you make the best chocolate cake. I closed my eyes. Emma's birthday party would be at Ashley's house, surrounded by Ashley's friends and Marcus's colleagues. I would be expected to bring the homemade cake and a generous gift, to smile and be grateful for being included, to pretend everything was normal, while everyone knew there was drama between me and Ashley. We'll see, honey. Let me talk to your mom about the details. But I already knew I wouldn't be going. Not because I didn't love Emma, but because I couldn't continue participating in the charade that I was valued family member when I was really just unpaid help with emotional attachment. That Sunday, my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a casserole and concerned eyes. Evelyn, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look like you've lost weight. Are you eating enough? It was such a simple question, but it made me realize that Mrs. Chen, a woman I barely knew beyond hallway greetings, had noticed something about my well-being that my own daughter had ignored for months. I'm fine, I said automatically, then stopped myself. Actually, no, I'm not fine. I'm having some family troubles. Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. Family troubles are the hardest kind. They cut deepest because they come from people who are supposed to love us unconditionally. She didn't ask for details, didn't offer unsolicited advice. She just left the casserole and said, If you need anything, anything at all, I'm right next door. That night, I ate Mrs. Chen's chicken and rice casserole while sitting at my kitchen table, and I realized something profound. This woman, who owed me nothing, had shown me more genuine care in 5 minutes than my daughter had shown me in months. Love, I was learning, wasn't about obligation or blood relations or shared history. Love was about seeing someone and caring about their well-being without expecting anything in return. Ashley called again on Tuesday, her voice tight with frustration. "Mom, Emma's crying because she thinks you don't love her anymore. Sarah keeps asking why Grandma is being mean to Mommy. This is affecting my children, and I won't stand for it." "Then stop using them as messengers," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Stop telling them that money problems are the same thing as love problems." "They're not stupid, Mom. They can see that you're pulling away from the family." "I'm not pulling away from the family. I'm pulling away from being treated like an employee rather than a family member." "That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid." "Am I? When was the last time you asked about my health, my day, my feelings about anything that didn't relate to your needs?" The silence stretched between us, and I could almost hear Ashley's mental wheels turning, trying to find an example that would prove me wrong. "I ask how you are every time I call," she said finally. "No, you say, 'Hi, Mom, how are you?' and then immediately launch into what you need before I can answer." Another silence. Then, "Fine, you win. I'm a terrible daughter." "Is that what you want to hear?" "I want to hear that you understand why I'm hurt. I want to hear that you care about my feelings as much as you care about my bank account." "Of course I care about your feelings. But Mom, you're making this so much harder than it needs to be. Can't we just go back to the way things were?" And there it was, the heart of the matter. Ashley wanted to go back to the way things were. Back to me being available, generous, and silent about my own needs. But I was done being silent. "No," I said. And the word felt like freedom. "We can't go back. And we're not going forward until some things change." I hung up before Ashley could respond, before she could deploy more guilt or manipulation or threats. For the first time in 40 years, I had said no to my daughter and meant it. The silence that followed was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The morning after I hung up on Ashley, I woke up to something I hadn't experienced in decades. Silence. Not the hollow silence of abandonment, but the peaceful silence of a life that belonged entirely to me. My phone wasn't ringing. No one needed me to babysit, to solve a crisis, to provide emergency funding. For the first time in 40 years, my Tuesday belonged completely to me. I made coffee slowly, savoring each step. I read the entire newspaper instead of skimming headlines between phone calls. I ate breakfast at my own pace, without rushing to get somewhere or do something for someone else. Around 10 a.m., I did something that would have been impossible just a week earlier. I called in sick to my volunteer job at the food pantry. Not because I was ill, but because I wanted to spend the day discovering who I was when no one needed anything from me. I walked to Millennium Park, something I'd lived 20 minutes away from for 15 years, but had never had time to truly enjoy. The Crown Fountain was running, and I sat on a bench watching children play in the water while their parents relaxed in the sun. These families looked different from Ashley's perfectly orchestrated gatherings. They looked relaxed, present, happy in simple moments. An elderly man sat down beside me on the bench. He was reading a book about astronomy, and when he noticed me looking, he smiled. "Beautiful day," he said. "Yes, it is," I replied, and meant it. "I'm Harold," he said, extending his hand. "I come here most mornings. Never seen you before." "Evelyn. I live nearby, but I've never had time to just sit here." Harold nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Retirement's the best thing that ever happened to me. 35 years as an accountant, always rushing somewhere. Now I have time to notice things, like how the light hits the water differently every hour of the day." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fountain cycle through its patterns. Harold asked no questions about my family, didn't need anything from me, didn't treat my presence as an opportunity to unload his problems. It was the most peaceful conversation I'd had in years. When I finally went home, I made a decision that would have terrified me a week earlier. I turned off my phone. For 8 hours, I existed without the possibility of someone calling to tell me about an emergency, a need, a demand disguised as a request. I cleaned my apartment slowly, rediscovering belongings I'd forgotten I owned. I found a half-finished crossword puzzle book, a painting set I'd bought years ago but never opened, a stack of library books I'd checked out but never had time to read. In my bedroom closet, behind the practical clothes I wore for Ashley's family gatherings, I found a red dress I'd bought impulsively 5 years ago but never worn. It was beautiful. Soft fabric, flattering cut, the kind of dress that made a woman feel elegant instead of invisible. I'd hidden it in the back because Ashley had once made a comment about age-appropriate dressing that had made me feel foolish for wanting to look attractive. I put the dress on and looked at myself in the full-length mirror Robert had hung on our bedroom door 30 years ago. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd been abandoned at the airport last week. This woman had color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. This woman looked like someone worth knowing. When I finally turned my phone back on that evening, there were 17 missed calls from Ashley and 6 voicemails. I listened to them in order, watching the progression from concern to anger to desperation. Message 1. Mom, I've been calling all day. Please call me back. Message 3. Mom, this is ridiculous. I know you're upset, but ignoring me isn't solving anything. Message 5. Emma wants to talk to you about her birthday party. You're being selfish, and it's hurting the children. Message 6. Fine, I get it. You're punishing us. But this silent treatment is cruel, and it's not like you. But it was like me. This was the me I'd been before I learned to make myself smaller to accommodate other people's comfort. This was the me who had opinions and preferences and the right to spend my Tuesday however I chose. I called Ashley back, but not immediately. I made myself dinner first. A proper dinner with vegetables and a glass of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Apparently, choosing myself was special enough. Mom, finally, Ashley said when she answered. I was about to call the police. I'm fine. I turned off my phone for the day. You can't just disappear like that. What if there had been an emergency? What emergency, Ashley? What could have possibly happened that required my immediate attention? The pause that followed was telling. Ashley had been so accustomed to having instant access to me that the idea of me being unavailable for even a few hours felt like abandonment. Emma wanted to invite you to her birthday party properly? She made you a handwritten invitation. I felt a pang of sadness for Emma, who was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. But I also recognized Ashley's strategy, using the children's disappointment to manipulate me back into compliance. That's very sweet of her. You can tell her I appreciate the invitation, but I won't be attending. Mom, she's your granddaughter. She loves you, and I love her, which is why I'm not going to continue participating in a relationship where love is conditional on my financial contributions and availability for free labor. That's not... God, Mom, you make us sound like monsters. I don't think you're monsters. I think you're people who learned that my love came without boundaries or expectations, and you've gotten comfortable with that arrangement. Ashley's voice softened, switching to the tone she used when she wanted something important. Mom, what do you want from us? Tell me what to do to fix this. It was a fair question, and I'd been thinking about it for days. What did I want? I want you to call me sometimes just to talk. Not because you need something. I want you to ask about my life, my interests, my feelings. I want you to remember my birthday without me having to remind you. I want you to invite me to things because you enjoy my company, not because you need a babysitter. I do enjoy your company. When? When do we spend time together that isn't about you needing something from me? Another pause. A longer one this time. We could start doing that. We could have lunch sometimes. Just the two of us. When was the last time we had lunch together? I don't know. It's been a while. Ashley, it's been 7 years. The last time we had lunch alone together, Emma was 9 and Sarah was 7, and halfway through the meal you asked me to babysit that weekend because Marcus's mother was in town, and you didn't want the children around during their visit. The silence that followed was heavy with recognition. Ashley was finally starting to understand the pattern I'd been living with for decades. I didn't realize, she said quietly. I know you didn't, and that's part of the problem. I became so useful to you that you stopped seeing me as a person with my own needs and desires. So what happens now? Now you decide whether you want a relationship with me that's based on mutual respect and genuine affection, or whether you want to keep trying to maintain the arrangement where I exist to serve your family's needs. Of course I want a real relationship with you. Then you need to start treating me like someone whose time and money and emotional energy have value. You need to start considering my feelings before making plans that involve me. You need to stop using your children as messengers and manipulation tools. Ashley was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to have a relationship with you that isn't about what you can do for us. The admission broke my heart a little, but it also gave me hope. Recognition was the first step toward change. We'll figure it out together, I said. But Ashley, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who will say yes to everything and ask for nothing in return. That woman was dying slowly, and I'm not going to let her disappear completely. I don't want you to disappear. I want to learn how to be a better daughter. But I need you to be patient with me. This is going to be hard. For the first time in our conversation, Ashley sounded like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, scared and vulnerable, and needing comfort she trusted I would provide. I can be patient, I said, but I can't go backward. I can't pretend that what happened at the airport didn't happen, or that the last few years haven't been a slow erosion of my dignity and self-worth. I understand. Do you? Because tomorrow, Marcus is going to tell you that I'm being unreasonable. Emma and Sarah are going to ask why Grandma doesn't love them anymore. Your friends are going to tell you that family comes first, and I should forgive and forget. And you're going to have to choose between the easy path of making me the problem and the hard path of examining how we got here. Ashley took a shaky breath. What if I choose wrong? Then you'll lose me. Not because I don't love you, but because I finally love myself enough to walk away from relationships that diminish me. Mom? Yes? I'm scared. And there it was. The truth underneath all the manipulation and defensiveness and entitlement. Ashley was scared of losing the unconditional support that had always been available to her, scared of having to navigate life without a safety net she'd never acknowledged she was using. I know you are, I said gently. Change is scary. But Ashley, I've been scared for years. Scared of being alone, scared of being a burden, scared of asking for too much. We can be scared together while we figure out how to do this differently. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and looked out the window at the city lights. For the first time in decades, I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. No one needed me to solve their problems or fund their dreams or provide emotional labor without reciprocation. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I pulled out a notebook I'd bought years ago but never used and wrote down a list of things I wanted to do now that my time belonged to me. Visit the Art Institute. Learn to paint with those watercolors I'd forgotten I owned. Take a cooking class. Read entire books without interruption. Call my old friend Margaret's sister, who I'd lost touch with after the funeral. Maybe even travel somewhere I'd always wanted to go. At the bottom of the list, I wrote, remember what it feels like to be Evelyn, not just Ashley's mother. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in years, wrapped in the quiet knowledge that I was finally, after 7 decades of life, learning to choose myself. The invitation came 3 days later, delivered not by phone call or text, but by Emma herself, standing at my door with red-rimmed eyes and a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. "Grandma," she whispered, and I could see she'd been crying. "Mom sent me to give you this. She said if you don't come to our family meeting, you might not be part of our family anymore." My heart shattered for this 16-year-old girl being used as a messenger in an adult conflict she didn't understand. I knelt down to her eye level, something I'd done when she was small and needed comfort. "Emma, sweetheart, no matter what happens between your mother and me, you will always be my granddaughter. Nothing can change that. Do you understand?" She nodded, but fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "But why is everyone so angry? Why can't things just go back to normal? Because sometimes normal isn't healthy, honey. Sometimes people need to learn new ways to love each other." I unfolded the paper. It was written in Ashley's precise handwriting. Family meeting. Sunday, 2 p.m. Marcus's office downtown. We need to resolve this situation once and for all. The girls will be there. Don't let this destroy our family. Marcus's office. Not their home, not a neutral location, but the place where he conducted business. This wasn't going to be a conversation about healing relationships. This was going to be a negotiation where I was expected to surrender. Sunday arrived gray and cold, with October wind whipping through downtown Chicago's concrete canyons. I stood outside the gleaming office building on LaSalle Street, wearing my red dress and a confidence I was still learning to inhabit. The doorman looked at me with polite curiosity. I clearly didn't belong in this world of power suits and expensive watches. Marcus's office was everything I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture that cost more than my monthly rent, awards and photographs designed to impress clients with his success. Ashley sat stiffly in one of the chairs, wearing her armor of designer clothes and perfect makeup. Emma and Sarah were on the couch, looking uncomfortable and confused about why they'd been summoned to their stepfather's workplace on a Sunday afternoon. Marcus himself was behind his massive desk, clearly positioning himself as the authority figure in this gathering. He gestured to a single chair placed directly in front of the desk, the hot seat, where difficult clients were placed to be intimidated into compliance. I didn't sit down. "Hello, Ashley. Girls?" I kissed Emma and Sarah on their foreheads, noting how they relaxed slightly at my familiar presence. "Marcus, Evelyn, please, sit down," Marcus said, his voice carrying the practiced charm he probably used on reluctant investors. "We have a lot to discuss. I prefer to stand. Thank you." Ashley shot Marcus a look I couldn't interpret, but I could feel the tension in the room ratchet higher. This wasn't going according to their script. "Mom," Ashley began, her voice carefully modulated. "We've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. We realize there have been some misunderstandings about expectations and boundaries. Misunderstandings. As if 40 years of one-sided giving had been a simple communication error. We want to make things right," Marcus added, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "So we've prepared a proposal that we think addresses your concerns while keeping our family together." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. I didn't move to take it. "What kind of proposal?" Ashley cleared her throat. "We're prepared to pay you back the money from your savings account. Not all at once, obviously, but over time. Maybe $200 a month, like Marcus suggested. And we'll be more mindful about including you in family decisions." "In exchange for what?" The question seemed to catch them off guard. They'd expected gratitude, not negotiation. Marcus recovered first. "In exchange for putting this unpleasantness behind us. The girls need their grandmother. Ashley needs her mother. We're a family, and families work through their problems. Families also respect each other," I said quietly. "They consider each other's feelings. They don't take financial advantage of their elderly relatives." "Mom, that's not fair," Ashley said, her composed facade beginning to crack. "We never took advantage of you. Everything we asked for, you gave willingly, because you taught me that saying no meant risking your love." Emma looked between her mother and me with growing alarm. "Grandma, what money? What's everyone talking about?" Ashley shot me a warning look, but I was done protecting her from the consequences of her choices. "Your mother has been taking money from my savings account without asking, Emma. Thousands of dollars over the past few months." "Mom," Sarah gasped, looking at Ashley with shock. "You said Grandma wanted to help with our camp and stuff." "I did want to help," I said gently. "But I also wanted to be asked, not just have the money taken while I wasn't looking." Marcus stood up, his professional mask slipping to reveal irritation. "Evelyn, you're upsetting the children with these accusations. Ashley had legal authority to access those accounts. Everything was above board. Legal? Yes. Ethical? That's debatable." "Look," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "I'm going to be direct here. You're 74 years old. You live alone. You have no other family. And frankly, you need us more than we need you. This little rebellion of yours is cute, but it's not sustainable. What are you going to do? Cut off the only family you have over money?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Emma gasped. Sarah looked at Marcus with something approaching horror. Even Ashley seemed stunned by her husband's bluntness. But instead of the crumbling defeat Marcus expected, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. "You're absolutely right, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I am 74 years old, which means I'm old enough to know the difference between family and people who think they own me because we share DNA. I turned to Ashley. "You want to know what I'm going to do? I'm going to show you." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying for 2 days, waiting for this moment. "These are revised custody documents for my will. Everything I own, my savings, my life insurance, my apartment, everything, is now going to the Chicago Women's Shelter. They help women who've been abandoned by people who were supposed to love them." Ashley's face went white. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. I've also contacted Social Security to report the unauthorized access to my accounts. Apparently, financial elder abuse is taken quite seriously by federal agencies." Marcus was on his feet now, his careful composure completely gone. "You can't do this. We'll contest the will. We'll have you declared incompetent." "On what grounds? That I finally learned to say no? That I decided my money should go to people who actually need it instead of people who feel entitled to it?" "Grandma, please," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you love us anymore?" This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment when my refusal to be used would be twisted into a rejection of love itself. I sat down next to Emma and took her hands in mine. "I love you more than you'll ever know. I love you so much that I'm willing to be the villain in this story if it means you might learn something important about how people should treat each other." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "Someday you will. Someday someone is going to try to convince you that love means always saying yes, always giving up what you want, always making yourself smaller so they can be bigger. And when that happens, I want you to remember that your grandmother was brave enough to say no." Ashley was crying now, her perfect makeup streaking down her cheeks. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We can do better." "Can you?" "Because Marcus just threatened to have me declared incompetent for refusing to be taken advantage of. That doesn't sound like someone who's interested in doing better." I stood up and looked around the room one last time, at the expensive office that was supposed to intimidate me, at Marcus glowering behind his power desk, at Ashley crumbling in her designer armor, at my granddaughters trying to understand why their world was falling apart. "I'm not asking you to choose between money and family," I said. "I'm asking you to choose between using people and loving them. Those are very different things." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Ashley, when you're ready to have a relationship with me that isn't based on what I can provide for you, you know where to find me. But I won't be providing anything else while you figure that out." "And what if we don't?" Marcus called after me, his voice harsh with anger. "What if we decide we're done with your drama and manipulation?" I turned back one last time, looking directly at him. "Then you'll prove that everything I believed about this family was true, and I'll know I made the right choice." Emma jumped up and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Grandma, I don't care about money. I just want you to come back." I held her tight, memorizing the feel of her hug, knowing it might be a long time before I felt it again. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. But I'm not going to pretend that mean words and selfish behavior are okay just because they come from family." Sarah joined the hug, and for a moment, the three of us stood in that cold, expensive office, surrounded by love that was real, even in the middle of all the brokenness. "I'm proud of you both," I whispered. "You have kind hearts. Don't let anyone convince you that kindness means letting people hurt you." I kissed the tops of their heads and gently extracted myself from their embrace. Ashley was still crying, but she made no move to stop me or argue further. Marcus was staring out his window, probably already calculating the financial impact of my decision. I walked out of that office and didn't look back. In the elevator going down, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd entered that building an hour earlier. This woman looked tired but relieved, sad but free. Outside, the October wind had picked up, but it felt different now, not harsh and punishing, but cleansing. I walked to the nearest coffee shop and ordered a real coffee. not the instant kind I'd been drinking to save money. I sat by the window and watched people hurry past on the sidewalk. All of them going somewhere. All of them carrying their own complicated stories of love and loss and learning to be brave. For the first time in 40 years, I had no idea what came next. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next would be my choice. And that was the most terrifying, liberating feeling I'd ever experienced. 3 weeks after the confrontation in Marcus's office, I did something I hadn't done in 47 years. I bought a plane ticket for myself, to somewhere I wanted to go, with money I chose to spend on my own happiness. The ticket was to Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'd seen a documentary about Georgia O'Keeffe's life there, about how she'd found herself in the desert landscapes and endless skies. Something about her story resonated with me. A woman who'd discovered her true voice later in life, who'd learned to paint the world as she saw it, rather than as others expected her to see it. The night before my flight, Mrs. Chen knocked on my door with a small wrapped package and that gentle smile I'd grown to cherish. "A going-away gift," she said, pressing it into my hands. "I'm proud of you, Evelyn. It takes courage to choose yourself." Inside was a beautiful leather journal, the kind with handmade paper and a ribbon bookmark. On the first page, she'd written, "For the stories you're ready to tell yourself about who you really are." I'd been taking small steps toward reclaiming my life every day since that Sunday confrontation. I'd started painting with those watercolors I'd found in my closet, creating clumsy but joyful landscapes that looked nothing like anything anyone else would want to hang on their walls. But they were mine, created by my hands, expressing something inside me that had been silent for too long. I'd joined a cooking class at the community college, where I learned to make pasta from scratch and talked with other people who were trying new things for the pure pleasure of learning. The instructor, a jovial man named Giuseppe, called me Evelyn the Artist, after he saw me sketching the pasta shapes in the margins of my recipe notebook. I'd started reading again. Real books, novels that transported me to other worlds where women my age fell in love, went on adventures, made discoveries about themselves that changed everything. I'd forgotten how it felt to lose myself in a story that wasn't about solving someone else's problems. Most importantly, I'd started saying yes to things I wanted and no to things I didn't. It sounds simple, but after decades of automatic self-sacrifice, it was revolutionary. When Mrs. Patterson from 3A asked if I could watch her cat for 2 weeks while she visited her daughter, I said no. When the volunteer coordinator at the food pantry asked if I could work extra shifts to cover for someone who'd quit, I said no. When the telemarketer called trying to sell me insurance I didn't need, I hung up instead of listening politely to the entire pitch. Each no felt like a small rebellion, a tiny act of self-respect that built upon the one before it. But Santa Fe was my first big yes. My first real declaration that Evelyn Harper had desires and dreams that mattered enough to spend money on, to take time for, to prioritize over everyone else's comfort. The plane was small, connecting through Denver, and I found myself sitting next to a woman about my age who was traveling to visit her first great-grandchild. "My granddaughter just had a baby," she said, showing me photos on her phone. "Little Sophia, 6 pounds, 4 ounces of pure perfection." I smiled and admired the pictures, feeling a familiar pang when I thought about Emma and Sarah. It had been 3 weeks since they'd seen me. 3 weeks since I'd heard their voices or knew what was happening in their daily lives. "Are you visiting family too?" the woman asked. "No," I said, and the word felt strange and wonderful. "I'm visiting myself." She looked puzzled, so I explained. "I'm 74 years old, and this is the first trip I've ever taken just because I wanted to go somewhere. I'm going to see art and eat food I've never tried and sit in places where no one knows my name or needs anything from me." Her face lit up with understanding and something that looked like envy. "Good for you," she said. "I've been talking about taking a trip by myself for 20 years, but there's always someone who needs something. There always will be," I said gently. "That's what I learned. There will always be someone who needs something. The question is whether you matter enough to yourself to say that sometimes someone else's needs can wait." When the plane landed in Albuquerque, I rented a car, another first, and drove the hour to Santa Fe through landscape unlike anything I'd ever seen. The sky stretched forever, painted in shades of blue I didn't have names for. The mountains in the distance looked like sleeping giants, and the desert plants seemed to understand something about survival that I was just beginning to learn. I'd booked a small casita at a bed and breakfast run by a woman named Maria, who showed me to a room with whitewashed walls and hand-painted tiles, and windows that looked out onto a garden where hummingbirds darted between red flowers. "You're here alone?" Maria asked, not with judgment, but with the recognition of someone who understood the significance of such a choice. "Yes," I said, and it didn't sound lonely anymore. It sounded like freedom. That first evening, I sat in the garden with a glass of wine, something I'd rarely done, since Ashley had always made comments about drinking alone being a sign of depression, and watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that made my amateur watercolors look like finger paintings. I pulled out Mrs. Chen's journal and wrote my first entry. Day 1 of my new life. I am in New Mexico, alone, but not lonely. I am 74 years old, and I am finally learning what I like, what I want, what makes me happy. Today I discovered that I love the smell of sage and the sound of wind chimes, and the way the light looks different when you're somewhere no one expects you to be anyone other than yourself. The next morning, I walked through the plaza, where Native American artists displayed their jewelry and pottery under a covered walkway. I bought a pair of silver earrings shaped like feathers, not because they were practical or because anyone else would approve, but because they caught the light beautifully and made me feel elegant. The elderly Navajo man who sold them to me smiled when I put them on. "They suit you," he said. "You have the face of someone who's learning to fly." I spent the afternoon at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, standing in front of paintings that captured the essence of this landscape I was just beginning to understand. There was one painting, a close-up of a flower that somehow managed to be both intimate and vast, that made me cry in the middle of the gallery. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition. This was what it looked like when someone painted their truth without compromise, without worrying about whether others would understand or approve. On my third day, I signed up for a pottery class at a local studio. My hands, which had spent decades serving others, felt clumsy and uncertain as I tried to center clay on the wheel, but the instructor, a patient woman named Rosa, encouraged me to stop thinking and start feeling. "The clay will tell you what it wants to become," she said. "You just have to listen." By the end of the class, I'd created something that barely resembled a bowl, but felt like victory. It was lopsided and rough, but I'd made it with my own hands, following my own instincts, creating something that hadn't existed before I touched it. That evening, I called Emma. It was the first time I'd initiated contact since that day in Marcus's office, and my heart hammered as I waited for her to answer. "Grandma?" Her voice was cautious but hopeful. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm calling from New Mexico." "New Mexico? What are you doing there?" "Learning to make pottery and watching the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen. How are you, honey?" We talked for 30 minutes about her school, her friends, her latest art project. She didn't ask about the family conflict, and I didn't bring it up. For half an hour, we were just grandmother and granddaughter, connected by love that had nothing to do with money or obligations or adult complications. "Grandma?" she said as we were about to hang up. "Mom's been really sad since you left. She cries a lot." My heart clenched, but I kept my voice steady. "Change is hard for everyone, Emma. But sometimes we have to be sad for a while before we can learn to be happy in healthier ways. Will you come back soon?" "I'll always come back, sweetheart. But when I do, things might be different. I'm learning to be a different kind of grandmother. One who loves you just as much, but doesn't give up pieces of herself to prove it." After we hung up, I sat in the garden and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd given up for this freedom. I missed my granddaughters terribly. I missed the idea of Ashley I'd carried for so long, the daughter who might someday value me for who I was rather than what I could provide. But I didn't miss the constant anxiety, the feeling of never being enough, the exhaustion of trying to buy love with my resources and my silence. On my last morning in Santa Fe, I hiked to a spot where I could see the entire valley spread out below me. The landscape looked infinite, full of possibilities I'd never considered when my world was defined by other people's needs. I thought about the woman who'd boarded that plane in Chicago 5 days earlier. Smaller, sadder, still carrying the weight of 40 years of diminished expectations. That woman was gone, not erased but transformed, like clay that had been fired in a kiln and emerged stronger, more beautiful, more itself than it had ever been before. I pulled out my journal and wrote, I am not the same person who left Chicago 5 days ago. I am not the same person who was abandoned at an airport 3 weeks ago. I am not the same person who spent 40 years believing that love meant disappearing into other people's lives until nothing of me remained. I am Evelyn Harper. I am 74 years old. I like silver jewelry and red wine and sunsets that paint the sky in impossible colors. I am learning to make pottery and speak Spanish and paint watercolors that look like no one else's paintings in the world. I am learning that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself for them. I am learning that being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. I am learning that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be before the world taught you to be smaller. Tomorrow I fly back to Chicago, but I'm not going back to my old life. I'm bringing this new version of myself home and seeing what she can build there. That night, I packed my small suitcase, but I was carrying so much more than I'd brought. I was carrying clay still embedded under my fingernails, the scent of sage in my hair, the memory of colors that had no names in any language I knew. Most importantly, I was carrying the absolute certainty that I was worth the time and money and attention I'd spent on myself these past 5 days, and that certainty was going to change everything. 6 months after Santa Fe, I was painting watercolors in my kitchen when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Ashley standing in the hallway, holding a small bouquet of daisies and looking nervous in a way I hadn't seen since she was 16 and had wrecked my car. I opened the door but didn't immediately invite her in. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "I brought you flowers, your favorites." They were indeed my favorites. Simple white daisies that I'd always loved, but that Ashley had dismissed as too plain for years. The fact that she remembered, and more importantly, that she'd chosen them anyway, felt significant. "They're beautiful," I said, accepting the bouquet. "Would you like some coffee?" Ashley nodded gratefully, and we sat at my kitchen table where months earlier I'd discovered the empty bank statements that started this whole journey. But the woman sitting across from her now was different. My hair was shorter, cut in a style that made me feel contemporary rather than invisible. I was wearing a turquoise blouse I'd bought in Santa Fe, and those silver feather earrings that caught the light when I moved my head. "You look," Ashley started, then stopped. "You look happy." "I am happy," I said simply. "How are you?" She paused, seeming to struggle with honesty. "I'm not great, actually. The girls miss you terribly. Sarah asks about you almost every day. Emma's been painting pictures of New Mexico because she said it sounded beautiful when you described it to her." I felt the familiar tug of guilt, the old impulse to fix everyone else's sadness. But I'd learned to recognize that feeling now, to let it exist without letting it control me. "I miss them too," I said. "How are you handling that?" Ashley looked surprised by the question, by my refusal to immediately offer a solution or take responsibility for everyone's emotional state. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I learned to see you as someone who existed to solve my problems rather than as a person with your own life. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made a list of all the times I called you for help in the past year, not to talk, not to spend time together, but to ask for something." She unfolded the paper, and I could see her neat handwriting covering both sides. 47 times, Mom. 47 times I called you because I needed money, or babysitting, or someone to solve a crisis. And do you know how many times I called just to see how you were doing? I waited. 3 times. 3 times in an entire year. Her voice cracked. And 2 of those were when I was waiting for test results and needed someone to distract me from worrying about myself. The confession hung between us like smoke. Ashley was crying now, not the manipulative tears I'd learned to recognize, but the honest tears of someone facing an uncomfortable truth about themselves. "I didn't know I was doing it," she continued. "I swear, Mom, I didn't realize I'd turned you into a resource instead of a person. But that doesn't make it okay. It doesn't excuse 40 years of taking you for granted." I poured coffee for both of us, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. Old me would have rushed to comfort her, to minimize her guilt and make everything better. New me understood that sitting with discomfort was sometimes the only way to grow through it. "What do you want to happen now?" I asked. "I want to learn how to be your daughter instead of your dependent. I want Emma and Sarah to know their grandmother as a whole person, not just as someone who shows up when we need something. I want—" She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "I want to start over. If you'll let me." "Starting over means accepting that I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago," I said. "I have boundaries now. I have my own interests and plans and priorities. I say no to things that don't serve me, and I say yes to things that bring me joy, even if they don't involve family." Ashley nodded. "I'm still learning what that means, but I want to learn. It means that last week when you called about Emma needing a formal dress for winter formal, and I said I couldn't afford to help right now, you can't call back 3 more times trying to convince me. You have to accept my answer." Ashley flinched. "I did do that, didn't I?" "You did. And when I said I was busy with my pottery class and couldn't babysit last Saturday night, Marcus texted me saying family should come first. That needs to stop. I'll talk to him." "No," I said firmly. "You need to set boundaries with him, just like I'm setting boundaries with all of you. Marcus doesn't get to guilt trip me for having a life outside of your family's convenience." We talked for 2 hours. Not about what Ashley needed from me, but about what a healthy relationship between us might look like. She told me about therapy she'd started, about how difficult it was to realize that many of her relationships were based on what people could do for her rather than mutual affection and respect. "The hardest part," she said, "is admitting that I learned this from watching how I treated you. The girls have started expecting me to fix everything for them, to solve every problem, to always be available. And I realized they learned that from watching how I treated you." When she left that afternoon, she didn't ask for anything except permission to call again soon. She hugged me at the door. A real hug, not the quick, distracted embraces I'd grown accustomed to. "Mom," she said as she was leaving, "I'm proud of you, for choosing yourself. It must have been scary. Terrifying," I admitted, "but not as scary as disappearing completely." The next month brought small changes, like flowers blooming slowly in spring. Emma called just to tell me about a book she was reading. Sarah sent me photos of a clay sculpture she'd made in art class, inspired by stories about my pottery lessons. Ashley invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us, without any agenda beyond spending time together. It wasn't perfect. There were moments when old patterns tried to reassert themselves, when someone would ask for something and seem surprised when I considered whether I actually wanted to help. But each time I honored my own boundaries, each time I chose myself without crumbling from guilt, the new dynamic grew stronger. Harold, my friend from the park, became a regular part of my weeks. We met for coffee every Thursday morning, and he taught me about astronomy while I told him about my painting class. He was the first male friend I'd had in decades who never asked for anything beyond companionship and conversation. Mrs. Chen and I started cooking together on Sunday afternoons, sharing recipes from our different backgrounds and laughing about the disasters that happened when we tried to combine Korean and Midwestern techniques. She told me stories about immigrating to America as a young bride, about learning to be brave in a language that wasn't her own. I joined a book club at the library, where I discovered that I had opinions about literature that other people found interesting. I traveled to Michigan to see the fall colors, to Colorado to visit a cousin I'd lost touch with decades earlier, to Portland just because I'd always wondered what it would be like to live somewhere where it rained all the time. Each trip, each new experience, each conversation that wasn't about solving someone else's problems, added another layer to my understanding of who Evelyn Harper was when she wasn't busy being what everyone else needed. The biggest test came at Christmas. For the first time in 40 years, I made my own plans for the holidays, instead of automatically assuming I'd spend them managing everyone else's traditions. I booked a trip to Savannah, Georgia, where I planned to spend a week exploring historic architecture and eating food I'd never tried. When Ashley called to discuss Christmas dinner plans, I told her about my trip. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "But Mom," Ashley said finally, "you always spend Christmas with us. What about the girls? What about our traditions?" "You'll create new traditions," I said. "And when I come back, I'll hear all about them." But who's going to make your famous sweet potato casserole? Who's going to watch the girls open their presents while we make breakfast? The questions revealed so much about how my family had learned to see me, not as a guest at their celebrations, but as unpaid staff who happened to be related to them. You'll figure it out, I said. You're all capable adults. Christmas in Savannah was magical. I took a carriage tour through the historic district, attended a concert at an old cathedral, and had Christmas dinner at a restaurant where the waiter called me beautiful lady, and meant it. I missed Emma and Sarah, but I didn't miss the exhaustion of cooking for 12 people while everyone else relaxed, or the feeling of being essential but somehow invisible at the same time. When I returned to Chicago, I found a package waiting for me. Inside were handmade cards from Emma and Sarah, filled with drawings of our memories together and promises to call more often. Ashley had included a note. We missed you, but we also realized how much work you always did to make our celebrations possible. Next year, we want to plan something together where you get to enjoy it instead of managing it. That spring, almost a year after the airport incident that changed everything, I had my first art show. It was small, just a corner display at the community center where I took classes, but it was mine. 12 watercolor paintings I'd created over the past year, each one capturing something I'd discovered about beauty, about resilience, about the courage it takes to bloom late in life. Ashley came to the opening, bringing Emma and Sarah. They stood in front of my painting of the Santa Fe sunset, the one I'd been working on the morning Ashley knocked on my door with daisies, and Sarah said, "Grandma, I didn't know you were an artist." "I didn't either," I said. "I'm still learning." Marcus didn't come, which was probably for the best. Our relationship remained cordial but distant. He seemed unable to understand why I wouldn't simply forgive and forget, why I insisted on maintaining boundaries he found inconvenient. But that was his limitation, not mine. Harold bought one of my paintings, a simple scene of the park where we'd first met. "It captures something," he said, examining the way I'd painted light filtering through leaves. "It captures the feeling of finding unexpected joy." That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and looked at the painting I'd kept for myself, a self-portrait I'd worked on for months. In it, I'm wearing the red dress I'd forgotten I owned, standing in a landscape that combines Chicago architecture with New Mexico sky. My face is weathered but peaceful, my eyes bright with possibility. It's the face of a woman who learned that love is not sacrifice, that boundaries are not walls, that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. It's the face of someone who discovered that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be before the world taught you to be smaller. In my journal that night, I wrote the final entry in the story of my rebirth. I am 75 years old, and I am exactly who I want to be. I am a mother and grandmother who loves fiercely but not destructively. I am an artist who paints truth as I see it. I am a friend who gives and receives with equal grace. I am a woman who travels alone and sleeps soundly and says no without guilt. I am not the woman who was left at an airport a year ago. That woman was dying slowly, disappearing piece by piece into other people's lives. This woman, the one writing these words, is fully alive, fully present, fully herself. To anyone reading this who feels invisible, taken for granted, or lost in other people's expectations, it is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to remember that you matter, that your dreams have value, that your happiness is worth fighting for. The people who truly love you will learn to love this version of you too, and the people who don't, well, their departure will make room for relationships that nourish your soul instead of depleting it. I closed the journal and looked around my small apartment, which had become a sanctuary filled with my paintings, my pottery, my books, my choices. Tomorrow I would wake up and decide how to spend my day based on what brought me joy, what served my growth, what honored the woman I'd worked so hard to become. I am Evelyn Harper, and this is the life I choose. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Taken for granted by people who are supposed to cherish you? Have you ever given so much of yourself that you forgot who you were underneath all that giving? Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? If this story touched something inside you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Someone out there needs to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself, and your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need them most.